Welcome to the Georgia Department of Transportation Right-of-Way Acquisition Training. This morning, Gary Webb, which is me, and Eric Murray will be talking to provide an overview of the right-of-way acquisition process. Right-of-way acquisition begins with understanding the appraisal and the 532 reviewer report. That's the document that, once approved by the reviewer, becomes the basis for the offer for any owner or other interest or tenant with the property. So that appraisal in 532, along with the right-of-way plans that you have previously reviewed, become the basis for your information. Be familiar with the property. Plans and cross-sections and appraisals are critical, but it's almost imperative that you visit the property prior to making the offer to the owner. We've all used Google Earth, we've all used Google Maps, but again, a personal visit, even if it's only an hour beforehand, can oftentimes make the difference about whether you really understand what's going on or not. Keep in mind throughout your acquisition process that negotiation records are critical. There is a new negotiation record format that provides in great detail and provides areas to record different phases of the acquisition process. And so those records are critical to Georgia DOT and to the closing attorney, to any eminent domain proceedings if it becomes necessary. Be mindful of the schedule in right-of-way acquisition. If you are part of the scheduling of parcel acquisition negotiations, do the easy ones first. Do the relocations first. And get them out of the way. Be sure that the offers are made promptly and that the negotiations are kept on schedule. Follow up with the property owner frequently and elevate when necessary. If you're having difficulties, bring in an acquisition manager or an appeals officer if necessary. Remember, the offer must be made in writing. There is an offer letter that is used by Georgia DOT. Any right-of-way acquisition projects, one of the first steps is contacting your GDOT contact to make sure you have the latest offer of the offer forms. And there's a number of forms included. One is the standard offer letter, and then there are others for different situations, whether it's another interest or a trade fixture, but be sure and use the right offer letter. There is a recently revised summary statement basis for just and adequate compensation that provides the detail that's established by law for making sure that the owners receive the amount of information that they need that provides the basis for the offer. And now that summary statement basis has attached to it a listing of the comparables. The appraisers are now putting a list of the comparables in the appraisal for use in conjunction with the summary statement basis for providing that information to the owner. There is a form for the receipt for brochure. GDOT has a brochure, which I'm sure you've all seen, that talks about what happens when the government requires your property for a transportation project. We want to be sure that the brochure is presented to the offer and a receipt is obtained showing that he did receive it. There's an availability of incidental payments letter. Most of the closing expenses are handled by Georgia DOT. There's a couple of items that have to be handled outside of closing in relationship to taxes and in relationship to the replacement of survey stakes and property corners along the frontage of acquired right-of-way. There is a form for the option for right-of-way. This is the document that the owner and the department use to come to an agreement. It states the right-of-way required, the amount, and is signed by both parties before the parcel is sent to the attorney for closing. In case of counteroffers, the same option is still used. The owner crosses through the offer amount, puts any stipulations that he thinks are necessary, signs it, and returns it. Again, last on this list, but certainly not least, is the owner's acknowledgement of the plans and explanation. As we've talked before, the owner gets plans, he gets colored plans, he gets a full explanation, and all questions should be answered. And then he signs a receipt acknowledging that process. There are different ways of making offers, and in the COVID and post-COVID world, that has changed. The first option is always to make them in person. You know, it's interesting going through a video presentation, just talking about plans. It's really difficult at times to explain plans when you don't have that person in front of you who is looking at the same thing you are and that sort of thing. And so in person is always the first option for presenting an offer to an owner. Occasionally, you can't do that because of distance, because of circumstances, and so certified mail is an alternative. It is preferred that we do not make offer over the phone for a lot of reasons. When contact is first made, the owner really doesn't have the plans, he doesn't have the cross sections, he doesn't understand what's going on. So it's not just preferred, it's a policy to not make an offer over the phone, but to send the offer along with the documents that explains what's going on. Technology obviously has changed a lot. People are using Zoom technology, they're using Teams technology. There's a lot more email going on. There's a lot of benefit to this, because now, you know, before you can actually email the materials, the guy or the owner can get them the same day. And so you can actually have a conversation, a telephone conversation about the offer and about the plans, which is a great benefit. Most people can receive PDF copies and read them, and that way you both have the same information to discuss the offer. Georgia has specific policies about sharing appraisal information. Do not give the property owner a copy of the appraisal. Items you can share with the property owner is comparable sales information and cost to cure information. I mentioned earlier that the comparable sales, there's a comparable sales page typically included with appraisals now that can specifically be used to give to the owner. So you can give him a copy of that page from the appraisal, and then the relevant cost to cure information that provides justification for the cost to cure or damages to his property. In making an offer, the negotiator has responsibility to do a number of things. One, confirm title. Make sure you're making the offer to the right person. Make sure that the property has not been sold. If there have been additional liens placed on the property, that's important to know before you get to closing, and everybody gets surprised and closing can't occur because the necessary releases have not been addressed. So confirm the title. Explain in detail the basis of the offer to the property owner. A review of the brochure is actually a pretty good way to do that, because it explains that the property is appraised by independent appraisers. You note that the appraisal is reviewed, and so that becomes the basis of the fair market value offer. And then obviously you go to great detail explaining the plans and any cross sections, driveway profiles, and the impact of the right-of-way acquisition to the owner. Should make the owner aware of any procedures, including payment of incidental expenses. Again, that is the letter of incidental payments, making sure that he understands all the closing costs are handled by the department, except for the things that have to be outside, which is the property tax allocations for partial acquisitions and the replacement of property pins. The owner must be given a reasonable opportunity to consider the offer. And again, obviously, many times that's in the eye of the beholder, but typically we would expect right-of-way negotiations to take between 30 and 60 days, particularly on simple acquisitions. Remember, no coercive action in order to induce an agreement. This isn't a negotiation. Remember that the property owner knows more about his property than you do. And this is probably always the case. You know, listen to the property owner's concerns, let him talk. Sometimes he'll answer his own questions if you let him talk enough. So make sure you give him an opportunity to talk and you to listen. Right-of-way acquisition covers a number of situations, and the scope of this is not to include all the complex negotiations that you might run across, but be aware that there are leasehold estates out there, there's life estates out there, there's corporations, and corporations sometimes can be simple, sometimes they're very complicated because of their corporate structure and who can approve property disposals and who can't. Churches are another example, depending on their charter and how they're organized. You may have one guy that controls everything, or you may have several boards that you have to go through. And then there's a number of situations where there are multiple owners or multiple interests in a parcel, and sometimes those multiple interests do not have common objectives. And so just be aware that that may involve a lot of conversations with a lot of different people. Again, a negotiation records reminder, if it's not written in the negotiation records, it did not happen. If there's no record of it, then there's no record of it. Those negotiation records have to be dated, they have to be legible. Fortunately, most of us now, I think, are using electronic Word documents, but make them legible. They should be detailed, but they're not a novel. Cover the basic points to the detail that is needed. All of them should be signed. Property management standards for right-of-way acquisition, 7 days to make first contact with the property owner. That's from the time you receive the approved 532. 7 days to make contact with other interests. We would like negotiations to be completed in 30 to 60 days. You know, it takes a long time to get to the point where that 532 comes. I mean, we've gone through pre-acquisition and we've gone through appraisals and cost of cures and finding people. But our friend Eric Murray says, GDOT's like a big ship. When it gets to you, you have to be ready to go. So we've been sitting around waiting on them. And when the information comes, it's time to move. Right-of-way closings will be handled by the GDOT attorney, who is a special assistant attorney general. There are a number of them around all across the state. Lien release for property acquisitions less than $25,000 now. That's a recent change over the last year or so. So be sure that those are turned in when you provide the closing documents. A reminder that any title certificates should have been discussed with the owner, so that if there are any issues, you can make sure that he's aware of them and that the title attorney or SAG will be trying to work those out with him. And also ensure that all interests have been acquired. To get to a closing table and then find out that there's an attorney involved or a life estate involved or something is a pretty late date. So try and cover all that ahead of time. The right-of-way acquisition agent is responsible for getting the information of the closing attorney, including drafts of the right-of-way deeds. We earlier talked about R parcels. If there's an R parcel involved, and we have to make sure the plans reflect that, and we get the deed for the R parcel. Drafts of settlement disbursement statements have to be provided. Many times a 1099 form is required, and the owner's affidavit draft has to be provided to the title attorney. Final title certificate is a responsibility of the closing attorney to make sure that is done, and any quitclaim deeds that are necessary for release of liens or other interest have to be coordinated with the closing attorney. And now, Eric Murray will talk about breakdown in negotiations.
We're going to continue now with this module and talk about what happens when negotiations break down. Unfortunately, when we are negotiating, we will sometimes experience a breakdown in negotiations. And one thing that I want to remind our agents of is that you're going to run into irate property owners. And what we want to remind you of is to always remain calm and to be professional, even when the property owner is irate. And understand also that condemnation may be necessary and is one of the options that we have in order to acquire property. It's not the ideal one, is not the one we want to use, but sometimes it's necessary. And when it becomes necessary, we want to make sure that we are still providing the best service that we can to the property owners. And when you run into condemnation, there are certain things that we need to do to make sure that we have everything that we need. First thing you should do to make sure that the title certificate is within 6 months of the current date. We also want to make sure that the appraisal reports have been updated within the last 12 months. We don't want to go into litigation with old data and old information, so we want to make sure that all the information is up to date and that we have everything we need to continue to move forward concerning litigation. The next slide we're going to talk about is kind of about a flow chart of what happens and what we need to do in order to be prepared to go into litigation. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we send a 10-day letter. And what it does, a 10-day letter does, it gives the property owner 10 days to decide whether or not they want to reach an agreement or to see an appeals officer or move to litigation. So we want to send that letter and they have 10 days to decide. If they do not respond to that letter, well then after 10 days, litigation or condemnation process will begin. The next thing is we want to request 3 copies of the page 13 and output file. Now the page 13 is the appraisal's affidavit. And what the appraiser is doing at this time, he's certifying that that value that he has come up with is indeed the fair market value. And the output files are needed, which is the information that comes from the plans to make sure that we have the data that we need in order to produce a petition. And when received, run the output file through D router to get an Exhibit A for the legal. And that's very important because we have to have an Exhibit A and make sure all right-of-way and easements are described. So you want to make sure that all the easements are described and the right-of-way, and make sure that all those close. So it's very important that we review the output files and all the exhibits. And then next, we should email a legal description and color and uncolored plan sheets to the condemnation with the condemnation petition and request a letter with a due date, names, addresses of the tenants in possession, and a copy of the page 13 to the GDOT SAG, which is the GDOT attorney for preparing the petition. Then the department's attorney prepares the petition, emails them back in a Word format within 10 business days. Then after that, the team prints one petition and inserts the original and the page 13, then sends the petition and the other original pages to condemnation prep. Then condemnation preparation review and route to GDOT. And this is why this has to be done in a timely fashion, because it takes the commissioner's signature and the treasurer's signature. And so this should take no more than 20 days. So you see that that's a very important step. So once you get all those things completed, and that's why it's important if if negotiations break down, that the condemnation process should begin, because it takes a little time to prepare the petition. And once the petition is prepared, it takes a little time to route it to all the people who need to sign it, such as the commissioner and the treasurer. And you know, the last thing you want to happen to you is that you send the document to the commissioner and he's going to be gone for 2 weeks, because that could almost destroy your schedule. So you just want to make sure that you have some time built in, so that if it takes a minute to go through the routing process, that it doesn't affect your schedule. And the condemnation condemnation preparation, they will keep track of where the petitions are. And the petitions will be returned back to condemnation prep section, and they will be sent to the right-of-way team manager or the acquisition manager. So at this point, we will order the check and we'll send a copy to the project attorney, and they will file the petition in behalf of GDOT. And then the condemnation process, as far as the agent is concerned, would have been completed. So the main thing that we want to stress with this condemnation, when you see that the negotiations are not going well, you can start obtaining the documents that you need in order to file the condemnation. You can go ahead and get your page 13, which is the appraisal affidavit. Then you can also go ahead and order an updated title from your attorney. You can also order an updated appraisal report from your appraiser if necessary. And you can make sure you have all these documents, so when it's time to move forward to condemnation and to prepare the petition, you'll already have all those documents in hand, and it should make the process a smooth process. So we just want to keep in mind that if negotiations break down, make sure you keep everything moving. And we thank you for listening to this training.